right, so we're about to have a conversation on community development, something that is so critically important for us to have as a people in Ghana. I've been joined this morning by Yvette Tetteh. Now, if the name rings a bell, well, I can tell you why it rings a bell. Swimming across the Volta is no mean feat. I don't think anybody else has done it. So we're going to have a conversation with her about the why. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, still recovering from the end of the expedition.
So, first question that popped into my head. Have you always swum?
It feels like I've been swimming since I was a baby, but I actually have been swimming since I was 4 years old.
Okay. So, have you ever done competitive swimming?
I did, yes. In school, I was a competitive swimmer. But actually, as soon as I got to high school and university, I stopped swimming competitively. I've always just enjoyed it. I've just found it a really wonderful experience. And anytime I go to a lake or river or sea, I'm just always in the water. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, whose idea was it, first of all, that, the Volta Lake, looking at this body of water, I will get on it in a boat. Whose idea was it that, listen, jump in the water and go across?
It's kind of this collective idea. I was at dinner with some friends and also the founders of the OR Foundation and one of the science advisors for the OR Foundation. And we were talking about different kind of adventures and expeditions that had a strong science component. And they just sounded really cool. And I thought, okay, I really want to be able to do something. And it was another friend who said, oh, well, we have the Volta River. You already swim in the Volta River. And I thought, yeah, actually, that would be great. And the OR Foundation was already doing research on water quality and the way that water is affected by microfiber pollution from secondhand clothing. And so we thought, okay, well, the Volta River and the Volta Lake allows us to take a look at the country from north to south. So it really gives us a good picture. And yeah, that was the genesis of the Agbechi Living Water Expedition. Mm-hmm.
Now, prior to this expedition, had you done anything environmental, sustainability related, anything like that at all?
Well, actually, my whole business is an agribusiness. I co-founded a business called Evaya Farm with my business partner Emmanuel Ampadu, and from that position, we're looking at sustainability. So for us, we've always been interested in the environment, in farming, in reducing post-harvest loss, in raising incomes for farmers and people. I've been reflecting a lot on what sustainability means and how to achieve it. And I think we can only really have sustainability if we can truly have choice. And you can only have choice if you are actually informed and also if you have the resources and the income to make decisions. Otherwise, you're having to just kind of deal with the problem, which, if you don't mind, for me, leads into the whole point of the expedition. Because right now, few of us, I think, realize the millions of garments that are entering Ghana as secondhand clothing from the global north. And it's items of clothing that are essentially dumped here. But we have these amazing retailers and tailors who are upcycling, recycling, and really being part of a trade of that clothing. But it's such a high volume that we really want to see more attention go towards the work they're doing so that we can get more resources to them. So that all of us, whether we're like directly related to clothing or in our everyday lives, we have more choice to make more sustainable decisions.
Well, we'll definitely get deeper into that conversation on all of that. But I'm still very much fixated on the swimming. So on the daily, in terms of the weeks leading up to the beginning of the expedition, what was your routine like in terms of preparation?
Well, I have been swimming for most of my life, as I mentioned, but I'd never swum such a far distance. So I really did have to take my training seriously. So for about 7 months prior, I was training at the beginning 3 times a week and then 4 or 5 times a week in the swimming pool at Burma Camp, running in the gym, just building up the strength and stamina to be able to swim these distances. And then, as I mentioned, like, it's really a research project. So the whole team had to train on how to collect water samples, how to collect air samples, how to start processing those samples, and really become science trained as well.
All right. So now that you've done this, I'm sure, I mean, a lot of people would be wondering, I mean, if we have somebody who can swim an entire length of the Volta River, the Volta Lake, you know, maybe we should get into competitive swimming as a country. Is that a potential for us, possibly?
Yeah, you know, people ask me a lot, you know, what's the next thing? And, you know, I've been looking, and I looked at the Olympic triathlon, which is really interesting to me because I love cycling and running as well. But there's a part of me that doesn't like to think about competition. For me, the whole point of this expedition was getting to explore Ghana. You know, it's such a unique opportunity to see different parts of Ghana and to get out of Accra. I think so much of our attention is on the urban centers, Accra, Kumasi, or Cape Coast, and there's so much more, and there's so much culture to interact with.
Was there any point in time on the trip that you said to yourself, you know what, I think I may have bitten off more than I can chew?
Oh, so many times, so many times. The thing about the Volta River is that, as we know, there's the Volta Lake in the middle. And on the Volta Lake, because it's basically a big basin, there isn't a current pushing you down. In fact, there's really strong winds pushing back up. So you really have to fight to move forward at all. So it's really exhausting. But truth be told, I was never, ever going to give up because it's just not in my personality. And, you know, the whole point, again, is that we're doing this for a cause. And so that's really motivating to know that people are going to care about this. And, you know, if I give up now, it's going to do a disservice to the work we're doing.
Now, from point to point, where did you set off? Where did you end?
So we started in Wipe in the northern region of Ghana, and we traveled down the Black Volta first, actually, into where the black and white Volta meet and becomes the Volta River, Volta Lake, all the way down to Ada. Yeah, it was a long journey. But it was funny because for most of the journey on the lake, there's really not many people. So we would see fishermen, we would sometimes pass by communities, but mostly there wasn't that many people. And then suddenly we got to Akosombo, and there were so many people all the time. And so, but it was nice for me, and I'm sure for the crew too, to be able to really share our journey in that way.
Somebody saw me a couple of days ago and asked, we were talking about this, and asked that, yeah, did she really swim 400 and something kilometers? What did you say to those questions?
Yeah, you know, it's sad for me to hear that, although I'm not actually surprised. I mean, it is an incredible distance. But the whole point for me about this expedition was to show people that something looks impossible. But if you break it down into smaller parts, it's really not impossible. Because it's not like I swam 450 kilometers in a day. That would be impossible. I wouldn't even try. But it's like sometimes I swam 5 kilometers, sometimes I swam 8 kilometers, sometimes I swam 15. And I think that's much more believable. But we get so caught up in fear thinking that it stops us from having new experiences and also just believing in something that's exciting. You know, it's boring to question everything and to have fear. Like, why don't you do something exciting? You know, I want everyone to go out and have their adventure.
So I'm thinking about this, right? Yesterday I was at an Olympic-sized pool, and we're just, having some conversations, and I saw this thing. I'm just thinking to myself, 50 meters, 10 laps is half a kilometer.
Yeah.
Literally. Right, so 20 laps is a kilometer. Yeah. So literally just means that, like you said, break it down into little bits, and suddenly it's doable over a period of time.
Right, and that's how my training worked. You know, I've been swimming my whole life, but it's not like I woke up being able to swim for 3 hours. When I first started, now, oh my God, 9 months ago or something, I could only swim maybe 30 minutes. But exactly as you're describing, I would go to the pool and I would swim for 10 lengths, and then I would swim for 30 lengths, and then I would swim for 60 lengths, or whatever it was, to be able to get to the distance. And, you know, it's funny because I have all the people at Burma Camp know me very well by now, and they were really able to witness how you can grow to be able to do something. Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely fantastic. So let's get to the actual on the ground happenings. Was there any time that you felt afraid, you felt your life was in danger? I know you have a crew around you, but was there any point in time you're like, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truly, I felt very at home in the Volta River, and there was only really, really one day for less than a minute when I was afraid, and that's because, as I was mentioning, there were these huge waves and the wind was blowing so strongly. The boat is going up and down like this, and I just thought, what's going to happen when I get in the water? And I got in the water and I immediately was pushed back, let alone, it wasn't even like I can't go forward. I was pushed back and I was worried I wouldn't even be able to get to the boat. But, you know, this is a real testament to training, and I just said, okay, I know my training. I just need to breathe deeply, take my time, and try. And actually it was fine, and then I swam for another hour or 2 hours, 1 hour or something. And, you know, I made my distance. It was slow, but it was fine in the end, yeah.
All right. So this swim has brought a lot of attention to you and to the advocacy that you're doing. What, for you, is the most important bit in terms of the advocacy? What do you want people to always walk away from a conversation remembering about the advocacy?
Well, for our global audience, I think the most important thing is, you know, our Stop Waste Colonialism campaign, where we're saying, we're creating this data, we're showing this data about the impact of secondhand clothing on the environment. And we have a community that's dealing with the problem. That community needs to be resourced. So we want to make sure that they're able to get the funds to do that. So that's our global audience, Stop Waste Colonialism. For our local audience, I think the message is more about finding the ways in which, as individuals, we can make intentional choices for sustainability that preserve the environment and that are thoughtful about our human community and our environmental community.
When you say stop waste colonialism, can you break it down for us? What does that mean?
So right now, when we talk about waste colonialism, we talk about countries in the global north basically exporting their waste, exporting the problem of waste to other countries, and in those other countries using the resources for their own efforts, right? So for example, in Ghana right now, the colonialism is that we're being flooded with these clothing, and these clothing are ending up damaging our environment because they're going to landfills, they're going into our water bodies, they're preventing us from living the lives that we want to lead and healthily. And so what we're saying is you can't just send your waste here with no resources, with no ability for us to effectively deal with it. So there can be a trade, but if there's going to be a trade, we need to respect all the different actors along that value chain.
All right. I have signed up, by the way, on that. Yes, I am the 4,421st person that signed up on the petition. So I believe in it. But yes, we're going to have a conversation with two other people. The captain of the expedition, and then we'll talk to some others as well. The researcher as well, Isabel. We'll have a conversation with her. We'll come back and we'll talk some more with Yvette. All right, so I'm here with Captain J.J. Adokranteng, and he's going to tell us how he managed to navigate this whole expedition from Bupe all the way to Ada. Captain. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
So, is this the first of its kind that you've ever done? I mean, at this level, the entire Volta River?
In 2001, I kayaked from basically all of the White Volta and Lake Volta, And then 2 years later, I did the same for the Black Volta and all the way to Lake Volta. So I knew the river. And so when Yvette approached me with the idea that she wanted to swim and everything, I suggested that we needed to do a risk assessment just so we know the river is what I remember it to be, because I knew it was a big river. Sometimes on the map of Ghana, we just do some little tiny squiggly things on the corner, the eastern side corner, and make River Volta look like it's just one of our rivers. But this is a river you can see from space. Yeah, if we're looking with satellites on Ghana. Yeah, it's that visible. So it tells you that from shore to shore, there are some places where it's 40 kilometers across. Yes. So this is, and that's why until recently, it was the largest man-made lake on earth. Yeah, there was no other lake that compared. So this was a very big, like the Americans say, a big ass river. Yeah, and this is just what it was. Yeah, and so it was that knowledge, knowing and having that healthy respect of this water system that then brought in all these conversations about what kind of boat to use and the size of the boat, and if you're looking at wave action, what kind of boat do you need to host people that would make sure that everyone was safe. So from an expedition perspective, we had to look at it for the challenge that it was, that this was really big, and if we were going to be successful on it, we needed to give it the respect it deserved.
Wow. But wait, hold on. Ghanaians, we don't like water like that, though. So how did you start with kayaking across the Black Volta or White Volta? I don't understand where all of this is coming from.
So I work for a company called Brave Hearts Expeditions, and that's basically what we do, outdoor adventure. But this was special. This project was special because we were going to have a person that was going to attempt something that had never been done before, swim all of River Volta. That was something that was amazing on its own. Number two, we're going to do it with a boat that was sustainable, a solar-powered boat that wasn't going to use 1 teaspoon of diesel or petrol or gas. Yeah, and to be able to do that, then, so the implications, both from a swimmer's perspective, from a science perspective of sampling the water to make sure that we had data to back whatever we're going to say about textile pollution, and then, of course, from a navigation point of view, if you can use a solar-powered boat on this river, then you can use a solar-powered boat on any river in Ghana. So these kinds of thoughts were what really fed into our minds. And of course, there are people in Ghana who do a lot of outdoor stuff. I know we only see these kinds of things in Najio, but there's a lot of adventure in Ghana, and there are a lot of people who are actually engaged. This building is high enough, I could strap you into a rope and a harnessing system and have you rappel off the roof as well. And so that's basically what we do, which was what made this exciting, because this was something different. This was unique. We were going to, one, work in support of the environment, find out about the health of Lake Volta itself, which was basically a river or lake that I literally depend on for my sustenance, and then also make history of having a person, a woman at that, swim the entire length. So when we put it together, it was too good of a challenge not to accept, and I'm glad that we did.
Wow. All right. Let me ask you, was there any point in the journey that you were like, am I doing the right thing?
So from a navigation perspective, not so much, but from a safety perspective, there were days when I feared for the safety of the boats, and there were days when I feared for the safety of the crew, and there were days when I feared for the safety of the swimmer. In terms of the boat, Lake Volta can sustain up to 4 feet of waves. And unlike the ocean where, the waves will break on the shore, these waves go as long as the wind travels. So if there was a storm in Ketekrachi and we were in Yeji, we would get the waves at Yeji for the storm in Ketekrachi, because it's one lake basically. So the wave just transfers and it never stops. Yeah, until maybe another landmass blocks it or slows it down a bit. And the thing is that it doesn't also tell you which direction it's flowing. We usually expect that rivers will flow south, but the waves go north. So if I pack the boat and I don't move it, and I'm in Ketekrachi, I'll end up in Buipe. Yeah, I'm not coming down south to Akosombo.
So is the wind moving from off the sea up onto the land. Is that the direction in which you will?
That's exactly it, because we have southwest winds flowing into Ghana, which is why we call the rains the southwest monsoons. Yeah. And so those ones come in, and they all of them get channeled through the Volta Basin, which is why a lot of international flights actually fly over the basin, because the thermals are good for flights. And so all of that gets channeled through that, and it sends it the other direction. Yeah, because to bring it down south then means then that you have to have the winds blowing from the north. And that only happens during the Harmattan season, which we aren't getting a lot of these days, because the southwest monsoon winds and the rainfall pattern is increasing more and more. We're not getting as much dry. When we got there in March, there were storms on the first day of arrival. So we're afraid for the boat, because then it's shaking a lot. You know, the waves are really throwing you about. And because it's a solar powered boat, in the middle of the night, you can't move because you don't have juice in the batteries. So it means you are at the mercy. There was one night when we drifted back 24 kilometers. Yeah, we woke up in the morning and we had moved 24 kilometers back where we came from. And then we're like, are we going to risk swim this, or do we go ahead to where we were supposed to be? And by the time you got there, you'd run out of juice. So you find some tree stump, lock into it, and wait for the next day to continue. So this was a level of challenge. And for her, when she was in the water, I'm looking out for sometimes water-based organisms, whether you have, sometimes if you have just fish, that's fine. But there are places that are known for black mambas, especially around the Buipe area. So if she's swimming too close to the shore, I will radio the kayaker that's with her in the water and say, can you get her to go into the middle, where I know that a chance encounter with a water snake will be minimal. And if there's lightning strike or electrical activity, then she needs to get back onto the boat, because then if you are on water and your head is sticking out, you are the tallest thing. Exactly, yeah. And if it strikes, you might get electrocuted as well. So these were the concerns. I mean, the best way to put this is that in this expedition, death was a possibility for both crew and everyone. But these were not enough to stop us. Yeah, we were not afraid. We knew they were there. We were respectful of the challenge. But once we had set out on the mission, we were confident we could do it. Yeah, and I'm glad we did. Yeah.
And here was I thinking that there are no adrenaline junkies in Ghana.
There are a lot of people who do crazy things. But I mean, even for me, and I live in the outdoors, when I actually got a call from a client about Yvette and said there was someone that wanted to swim the river. And we usually call ourselves crazy. So I'm like, if there's someone that wants to do this, she's probably crazier than I am. I need to meet her so I can measure her level of craziness. And then we did, and then she sounded serious. I'm like, okay, if you want to do this, we have to do a risk assessment. And I was hoping the risk assessment would let her know just how crazy this idea was. So after she sees it, then she's like, okay, maybe I was wrong. But all it did was empower her. The All Foundation came on board with the boat ideas, and then so basically we lived independently on the boat for 40 days. Yeah. Exactly.
I hear the boat was built in Ghana.
That's correct. There's an engineering company, Benlex Engineering, and that's not the only boat they've built. They've built another boat called the Trident, and even a much bigger boat, about 4 or 5 times the size of the Woman Who Does Not Fear. Yeah, all built here. Yeah. So we've got people who can build boats that size, and of course that's in future. If we need to build naval boats and those kinds of things, the opportunity is here to do all of that as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. We've been speaking with Captain JJ Adokoranteng. This is mind-blowing. I'm surprised. That's what I can say. We're going to talk to an environmentalist, a scientist, a researcher, and find out what was her part in all of this. So still in the conversation about the expedition, I've been joined by Isabel Abreu, and she is an environmental engineer and environmental scientist. And on the expedition, she conducted some research and all that. We're going to find more about what her role was and how challenging this experience has been. Isabel.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. So have you done anything like this before?
No, never. And I don't know whether we'll ever have a chance to do something like this. It has been an amazing experience.
Talk to us about the elements. Yeah, I'm sure there are different things that were amazing to you. Talk to us about the different things that you experienced that for you were just mind-blowing in your experience as an environmental engineer.
Yeah, so mainly it's just the opportunity of being surrounded by water 24 hours a day for 30 days. This is amazing. I think water is the place where I feel most comfortable with. Usually it's the sea, but this was the lake and it was just amazing. And all the serenity and the nature sounds, the birds in the morning, the birds in the evening, all the movement of canoes and people. It's just like, it's like a living painting. It's just really beautiful.
I like the description, a living painting. All right, so for you, what was the excitement that drew you into this project?
So I've been invited to take part in the expedition when they had already started and they needed extra hands to accomplish all the tasks. And when they asked me, I just said yes. I didn't have to think a lot about it because I knew about the expedition. The expedition was ongoing and I was following them on Instagram and everything looks just so amazing. And I thought, I wish I could be part of it. So when they called me and they asked, I immediately said yes. And I was free and so it was not very difficult. It was not such a difficult decision.
Okay, so what role did you play on the boat, and just share some of the scary moments, some of the happy moments?
All right, so my task on the boat was mainly to collect the water samples. So part of the monitoring program, we had to collect water samples, air samples.
How frequent?
So we do it every day. So we collect water samples every day. So I was actually going on a kayak, so we have to move a bit far from the main boat. And we collect samples from both sides of the boat. So you have to go on your kayak 150 meters to one side, collect some samples, get some data. So there is some data that you collect immediately on the spot. We have like a tool and we have an app on the phone, so we collect the coordinates so we know what we're talking about. And then you collect some information immediately about temperature, salinity, pH, turbidity. You collect the samples, you go back to the boat on the kayak, and then we process the samples on the boat. We have a lab. So we have to get the samples. We have a lab on the boat. It's a small lab, fully equipped. So I could process the samples on the boat to get it ready. So they need to be filtered, go through the filter, get dried in a case, a drying case, and then the lab in Accra will do the rest of collect the rest of the information they need. Plus we get some microscopic images where we will be able to do the counting of all the microparticles that we are looking at.
Any scary days?
Yes. Oh, but I just forgot to say something. So apart from the water, we also collect air samples every day, and these will also be checked by the lab in Accra.
Looking for things like air pollution.
Yeah, everything, or even like organic, like life, what kind of insects and what shows up in the air, all that, particles, everything. So we had like water samples, we had like closer to 300 samples of water. Plus there is a disc that Yvette carried throughout the swim. So every day she would carry a disc on the leg, in a case around the leg. And this disc mainly collects everything that is in contact with Yvette's body. So we are quite curious to see what we have in the disc. And yeah, so scary moments, not so much. And not really scary. Challenging, yes, a little bit. But I've never felt any fear or afraid. So the boat is quite stable. We have all the equipment and the life jackets and all that, and I know how to swim. So I was never scared. Some challenging moments, yes, because we had, like for example, we had a night storm. We could not see it coming, and then suddenly at 2 a.m. there is this huge storm. There is water everywhere. There is wind everywhere. And then suddenly your sleeping bag, because we sleep on the deck, so suddenly your sleeping bag is all wet. You are just like complete, and then so you have to put the covers on the side of the boat. We have these plastic covers, but by the time you do that, everything is wet. So that's quite difficult to do in the dark with the wind, but it's not scary, but it's challenging. And also, but it's really there that you feel that you're really dependent on nature. because, I mean, at home, yeah, it's raining, you can close the windows, right? You are caught by the rain when you're walking on the street, you get home and you have a hot shower. On the boat, you're really so close to all these elements that, but it's also interesting to see how you can cope with. And for example, on the kayak, when I go for my sampling, sometimes the current is really strong. So it's quite easy to get there. But by the time you open the tubes, you get the water, you get the data, your kayak has drifted. And then it's quite challenging to come back to the main boat because you're really going against the current. So there are challenges, and but it's not scary, and it's part of the adventure. I'll do it again. I would stay on the boat for much longer. I wish I could be there still. Yeah. Yeah, it's very good.
So I guess probably one of the things that I would want to also find out from you is the samples that you took on the boat. Were there things that surprised you?
All right. So we've collected the samples. We processed the samples, so they're ready, and they're already being looked at by the lab in Accra. But before we get any conclusion, before we reach any conclusion, I think it will take around 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
And it's not just by looking that we see, right? So in some places, many closer to villages, we've collected some samples to test for bacteria because it's normal to have this organic contamination close to villages. So we've done that. We already know what it is. We've collected some information for example, heavy metals closer to more industrial areas. But it still takes some time to get some results.
Thank you very much for talking to us. This has been fantastic. All right, so we'll be speaking with Isabel Abreu, and she is an environmental engineer. She was part of the expedition. Fantastic, experiences that she had as well. We'll be talking to Yvette again. You're looking further down the road in terms of looking at impact and the expectations as a result of what she's done, but we'll also be talking to 2 other people to find out their perspectives, Ofwe Amagavi and then Edwin Jobo, who were both part of the expedition as well. So the next person we're going to talk to, he's the communications manager for the expedition. Now, I think this is probably the only role that I'm wondering, why do you need a comms manager? All right. Edwin Jobo is my guest right now. Edwin, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Okay. So, answer the question for us.
Okay, so a bit of clarification. I'm the comms manager for the OR Foundation, which is the sponsoring organization for the expedition. And I was the science lead on the expedition. Yes.
Comms manager and science lead. Okay. How do you do comms and science?
So of course the science bit is part of the kind of research we're conducting, is what we call citizen science. So the scientific procedure was drawn up by a marine biologist with whom we work with from San Francisco, Dr. Dimitri Dehin. So he designed the program, and then we were trained for the expedition. Of course, given the nature of the boat and the limited number of people who were on the boat, we had to be assuming more tasks than we would normally do. So my job was to facilitate some comms efforts, particularly between the boat and the team back in the office. But primarily for the expedition, I was tasked with handling the science and making sure that we were following the procedure. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure as a comms person, you're thinking about the end from the beginning. So you understand, it's like you already have a plan in mind. What do I need to do to execute, the set plan, whatever. For you, were there moments on the boat that you were like, these are like your wow moments or aha moments, and you're like, this is just what amazing shit?
There were a few, and at the same time, for an expedition of this nature, because it's the first of its kind, there were no precedents for us. That's one. Two, we couldn't anticipate everything that would happen at every point. But for me, what stood out the most was engaging the communities people from the communities that we spoke with along the way. There were a number of interviews that we conducted, and it was the information that we were learning about their ways of life, how they viewed Accra. The main entry points for us, even in terms of the research, if we talk about the scientific research, was, for me, the most surprising one was learning how many people actually knew that the Korle Lagoon was once swimmable. Yes. And that became an entry point into explaining the research that we were conducting to them, because then we were able to point out that given how heavily polluted the lagoon is, if we're not caring for our water bodies and the way that the expedition is going to become the same. Yes. So that was the most astounding piece of information for me to have learned.
Let me ask, looking at the villages, the communities that you pass, the different towns, villages and so on that you pass through, the things you found out about them, comparing that to the science of the water bodies that they sat next to, were there any interesting things you found there?
So we have gathered over 1,000 data points from 292 combined air and water samples. Now we've brought them back to the team. We're currently undergoing an analysis, and so we expect to have the results in about 3 to 4 months. Now, and this is all to test the hypothesis that the further away you go from the center of town or the more developed areas like Accra, the less likely you are to see microfiber pollution in the waters. So this is what the study or the analysis is going to prove at the end of the journey. But from what we could tell from just observing with our eyes, we were seeing fewer clothing tentacles spread across the coastline. And the way that Accra's beaches are littered with clothing tentacles, we're seeing fewer of them. The air was cleaner, and so if anything, if I can make a guess as Edwin, not as a scientific person, and not speaking for the science, my expectation would be that the hypothesis will be proving true. That the further away you go from Accra, the further you go away from the center where we have Kantamanto, right? Taking in 15 million garments or clothing items a week, you will see, 15 million items of clothing weekly pass through or circulate through Kantamanto. Yes, and so the further away you go from that, the less likely you are to see clothing tentacles spread across the beaches, the river front, and the less likely you are to see heavy microfiber counts in the water. So that's our expectation, at the very least, on me. Yeah.
How much of this 15 million would you estimate, or if there's no literature to it, actually ends up in people's homes vis-a-vis water bodies?
So I'll speak to the waste bit rather, because then the clothing that the shipments that arrive are of varying quality. So it's hard to say how much of it ends up in people's homes, but we do know that it's between two things. 40% of these shipments are wastes and they go straight to the landfills. But when we say waste, we don't mean that they are of low quality and can't be worn. There's also the issue of there simply being too much clothing that is coming into the country. So of that 40%, it's not all waste, it's not all unusable clothing. Some of it is just too much to be sold. So if we were to estimate on the other side, we would say maybe about 60% roughly, but I expect that figure to be lower, is what makes it into people's homes. Yeah.
As a comms person, what's the ideal for you in terms of expectations beyond the expectation? You've done it. It was successful by all estimates and accounts. Looking forward, what's next?
What's next for us is it's across multiple things again. From the individual perspective, or for individuals, what my hope would be is that Yvette's swim, first off, is one that would communicate our tagline, which is impossible is just a feeling. You know, fear is something that we can overcome. Fear is something that we can face. It also, for me, would be ideal for us to have a very different relationship with our water bodies, such that we are caring for the water bodies, we're not polluting it. Because again, the Volta River system sustains lots of lives. The commerce that we saw, just about everything was transported on the river, from charcoal to clothing to food items. So it's a very important water body, being the largest in the country. So my hope for individuals is that we would have a very different relationship with our environment, particularly our water bodies. And on the other side, in terms from an industry perspective, this is all part of a campaign that the Oil Foundation is running called the EPR campaign. And now EPR is Extended Producer Responsibility, which is essentially a tax on textile makers to pay a certain amount of money that goes to managing the waste that they create. And so our hope is that with Kantamanto being the largest second-hand clothing market in the world, that the countries in the global north, we receive clothing from the UK, Europe, the US, Canada, and China primarily, that EPR policies would be put in place such that these countries and these textile producers would then pay money to Kantamanto and to the people in Kantamanto and to the communities in Kantamanto for them to have to make a sustainable living, and also help with the recirculating of clothes. That is already happening. They're just not getting the money for it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be having this conversation with Edwin Jobo, who is a comms manager with the OR Foundation, but also the science lead on this expedition as well. Well, we're going to talk to some more people. All right, the next person we're going to talk to on this whole expedition is someone who has been a colleague in the same industry for so many years. Now, I saw his name as part of the list, and I was like, since when did my brother become a water body, a specialist? But we're going to find out how he got involved and what it is that he did to, support the entire team. Ofwe, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
All right, so at what point did you become part of the conversation about this expedition?
Okay, so Yvette and I have been friends for a couple of years, and we used to swim a lot in her pool at home during the lockdown. So when there was time to go out, we used to spend a lot of time. I used to take pictures of her in her pool and all of that. So when the conversation about doing this expedition came up, she reached out to me, knowing that we had developed a relationship in like the swimming space. So she just reached out to me, knowing that I also do documentary photography. Yeah.
But the kayaking aspect, since when did you get into this kayak business?
That was my first time kayaking. Well, we had done some training, some trials with JJ at the Trident. So we did a lot of safety training before the expedition. But this expedition was my first time, first of all, kayaking, and then second of all, doing that long distance. And it just came up on the boat, like, okay, we are here now, this is what we need to do, and we need somebody who would kayak, and documenting her swim and having to be close to her during the whole time she was swimming, it just seemed right that I take on that responsibility. And yeah.
Now, as a documentarian, in the Ghana space, we typically don't deal with water bodies much. If we do deal with water bodies, we're probably sending drones in the air and all of that. How much did you have to prepare to get into this expedition?
So I think first of all, maybe I should give a bit of background on my interests, even in the water space. So now in the past few years, let's say since 2019, most of my work has been around highlighting the coastal erosion effects that's happening in my hometown, Ada, where over the period, like say in the past 20 years, homes have been lost, communities have had to move and change their ways of life, and my family having a direct impact, me and my grandfather's home being washed away in the process of, I took it upon myself to shed more light on what's happening in Ada. So my relationship with the Volta Lake kind of took off from there. But then prior to this, I had done free diving trainings in Tanzania, I have been swimming, like I said, a lot with Yvette. Not on her level. I am definitely not on Yvette's level, but my interest in water, like in the water space, has grown, and I'm more interested in applying myself in that space. Whilst I document what is happening there, I'm more interested in applying myself a bit more in the outdoor space as well. So, yeah.
Talking about free diving in Tanzania, is this Zanzibar?
I did the first training session in Zanzibar.
Okay. Have you been to Stone Town?
That was like 2019. I think the training was in Nungwi. So I didn't really go there to be on holiday. The main thing was more to get the first level certification. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in terms of the expedition, as a documentarian, what were some of the things you were looking out for? What were some of the things that were in the back of your mind? I need to be able to show this in a certain way best possible.
So I think for me, in the back of my mind, personally, coming from a space where even in Ada, people think the river is all they see at the estuary or maybe around Big Ada. Majority of the people I interact with in Ada don't necessarily have, or the younger people not necessarily have the idea that the river travels even as far as some parts of it coming from Burkina Faso. So for me, it was a task to kind of demystify the idea that the Volta is just what we see in Ada. And also, what stood out the most for me is how far people on the coast actually travel upstream of the river to still indulge in fishing activities. So I didn't feel lost having the opportunity to talk and speak my own language in far off places in the north, and learning that there's still some kind of hope if people want to move away from places like where the coastal erosion is happening. There's still family up north the river.
That's actually very interesting. So you're talking about people that are doing temporary migration. So they're not moving permanently, but they are moving.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. There are people, like, for example, a place where we stopped, Accra Yeji, and it was predominantly Ada, Dangbe, and some people from Winneba, and them coming together to live on an island and continue their fishing practices. And then when off season, most of them go back to where they originally come from to be with their larger family. Yeah.
So, in all of this, at the end of the day, what would you hope that your work would do to Ghana, to the world?
Well, I was hoping, and I am still confident that my work adds to the database of information collected about the Volta River. In doing my research for most of my work that I'm doing around the estuary, you would find a lot of papers being written. You find a lot of stats about the nature of the river, how much has changed, but you don't find a lot of pictorial or visual data, information about the river. Like, for example, I did a story about the underwater forest for the Untold Stories part of this same expedition. And it's surprising to know that after the river was expanded into a lake after the building of the dam, people don't know that there were remnants of a big forest that is underground now. And those are some of the things that are contributing to boats capsizing. Like, so you hear stuff like tree stumps in the river, but then there was a previous life that was existing before the dam was built. So I am believing that the images and the videos that we've been able to capture and document would add to the database about that particular region of Ghana. Yeah.
Wow. Yourself, if you look at what you've been through in this last 30 days or so, before you got on the trip, before you got on the expedition, what would you say has impacted you the most?
I would say the size of the lake. It was very unexpected. I did not expect to, at some point, not see from bank to bank. And it's actually making me believe maybe the Ghana map as it's drawn is smaller than it actually is. And it's being on it physically, kayaking it, and seeing how wide it expands, aside how much I had to put my body through, I am much more convinced that there's a lot more that we don't know about Ghana, specifically the Volta River Lake, and how important it is to protect it. Because at this point, I think it's the main water body that is intact and hasn't had much pollution. Well, we are yet to find out from the results from the data we've collected, but it needs a lot of protection. Yeah. Thank you very much, too.
So we've been speaking with Ufwe Amegabi. He was and is the documentarian for this expedition. All right, we'll come back and we'll talk with Yvette. So we've been speaking with different people who are part of this whole experience and all of that. We want to wrap up the conversation with Yvette and just find out, some of the other things that she's been involved in, where this is going as far as the expedition is concerned. Will there be other layers to this expedition, that they're working on and so on? Let's find out from her. So Yvette, what else do you do? I know about the Pure and Just Company.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So Pure and Just Company is an agribusiness that I run with my co-founder Emmanuel Ampadu, and we have a brand called Yvette Farm that I'm hoping people are already familiar with, and we produce dried mango, pineapple, pawpaw, and banana. And really our mission is to catalyze the potential we see in young Africans and specifically young Ghanaians by, creating sustainable jobs and supporting farming in Ghana as well. So if anyone's interested, they can buy from ShopRite, MaxMart, etc.
So your interests in sustainability, in the environment, everything have led you to this point. You've done the expedition. It's done now. We're waiting for results from the labs and all of that. Beyond this point, I know there's Stop Waste Colonialism conversations are going on. It's spreading around. People are talking about it now, and it is getting traction. What's the next big thing for you when you look at what's ahead?
Well, the thing that we've kind of been moving around as an idea is to be able to swim the Kwale Lagoon again. So we're hoping that, if the Stop Waste Colonialism campaign is fruitful, if we're able to get enough support, attention, and make enough change, that we'll be able to rehabilitate the water bodies in Accra, which is, where the problem starts and where our idea came from. We'd like to be able to swim that in 5 years. Yes.
I like that a lot. I don't know if I'm going to jump in and swim, but at least I would love to see boats, on the water. Yeah, because you see, 2 days ago, again, I've been having so many little conversations with different people about what you've done, and one of the things we're talking about is that when you go to Paris, there's a river running through Paris, Riverside. When you go to England, River Thames is running through. So why on earth do we not have a river that's running through the city that people can actually enjoy?
Yeah, it would be wonderful for us to have, clean water bodies in Accra that we can really interact with. And I think, even if we look at rivers in other countries, there still has to be continuous maintenance. So, yeah, I'd like to see us and by us, I mean, I guess the leadership get really involved in rehabilitating the waterways, because people by force are already having to interact with the water. I mean, those of us who are lucky to be able to buy clean water all the time do, but there are people who are having to use water, whether it's for bathing or drinking, even though it's not the best.
Now, what I find interesting is that that enclave of the Kwale Lagoon and Agbogloshi is literally the most polluted place on earth. Water and land. Yeah. Meanwhile, the majority of things, in fact, I don't know how many percentage, but basically everything that is there is imported.
Yes, I think that's right.
Everything's imported.
Right. I mean, I think this is what I was saying, and what we're saying is that there is so much dumping here in Ghana, and there are people, whether it's the electronics or on the textile side, who are making use of what there is to the extent that they can. So like I said, like if you go to Kantamanto, you can buy clothes that are being repurposed. And I think a lot of people, I'm less familiar, but I think a lot of people are salvaging what electronics can be salvaged, but it's too much. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is like formalize this industry and really look at it and then see, okay, who are the people who are doing work already and how do we empower them to do their work effectively?
What about conversations with policymakers? How has that been? Do you have any traction, in terms of raising the stakes to that level where Parliament and civil society organizations and so on are getting involved?
Well, there's actually a delegation from the OR Foundation that includes members of the OR Foundation and tailors and retailers from Kantamanto in France right now to promote our extended producer responsibility policy. So as I mentioned, like, the reality is that the problem starts outside of Ghana, and so this delegation is going outside of Ghana to say we are the people who are the solution and who are having to deal with the problem, and we need you to resource us. We need to be adequately equipped to deal with the problem. So on the policy level, that work is happening already.
Now, you mentioned the OR Foundation, and of course, this is one of the projects that they, have has been under their auspices. Who are the OR Foundation? What is it that they do?
So the OR Foundation is an organization that's been working in Ghana for several years. They're also a registered charity both here and in the US. And they work basically at the intersection of education, fashion development, and sustainability. So they've been looking at this influx of secondhand clothing for years now. Bruni Wewu, they've had several projects in the past. And they're now kind of expanding their research and the work that they do. They've looked at the impact of secondhand clothing also on, like, the Kayeye, for example, who are typically young women or women who have traveled typically from the northern parts of the country in search of economic opportunities. And what they're doing is carrying these heavy bales of clothing, secondhand clothing, around the market from the port, etc. So yeah, what they do is kind of look at what's happening on the ground here in Ghana, and also build out that picture to see, okay, but what are the international flows that are happening, and help all of us to understand what's happening.
For Yvette, what does success with the expedition look like?
I think on the global level, success with this expedition looks like really getting attention and energy behind the EPR policy and the Stop Waste Colonialism campaign, and getting that implemented. And then on the local level, success is kind of already for me being achieved, which is just to get people understanding what is happening, get visibility on the issue, and then also just to inspire people to really explore and appreciate and preserve the natural resources we have in our country.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for talking to us. It's been amazing.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So we've been having a very heartfelt, important conversation with Yvette and her team. We spoke with Captain JJ. We spoke with Edwin Jobo. We spoke with Isabel Abrio. We spoke with Ofwe Amegavi. And it's just been an amazing time talking to all of them and understanding what this expedition was about and the impact of the work that the OR Foundation is doing in Ghana.